Well, thank you for joining Bob Bodily. How are you, Bob?
Doing fantastic. Thanks so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. I think you may have seen that my first official episode of this podcast dropped today with Nifty Nay,
Yep.
beloved.
Congrats.
Thank you. Thank you. Beloved Bitcoin educated Nifty Nay, more
Yep.
on the lightning side of things, but she's like quickly catching up on all things L2 and obviously, does Bitcoin education for a living. I wanted to start with bringing on my favorite Bitcoin educators. You're officially episode 2. You are also one of my favorite Bitcoin educators in the space. We're going to get Janice on pretty soon. He's off getting married right now, but
Nice.
he's coming up
Yep.
pretty hot,
Yep.
I think.
Yep.
And I just sort of wanted to kind of ground, sort of the first few episodes of this podcast in some core themes, right? Like, let's get into some core themes, some core topics, some core trends in this Bitcoin Renaissance universe that we're all living in post the launch of ordinals, really. I mean, I think that there's sort of pre-ordinals and post-ordinals Bitcoin, and a lot of things are different on the technical side and on just sort of the general experimental, what can you do with Bitcoin side of things post ordinals. And you really got more and substantially deeper into Bitcoin in a post ordinals universe, but you were working with Bitcoin tangentially before that, I believe, through the Internet Computer Protocol with your work with ICP.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
Let's start there because we share a little bit of history here that I think is kind of fun to go into. Tell me a little bit about how you got into the Bitcoin L2 universe, because I think it was technically before the launch of ordinals.
Yeah. So the Internet Computer Protocol, I would call it a decentralized web services blockchain. So different paradigm than many other blockchains out there. And it does have a lot of really great interoperability tech. So for example, there's a Bitcoin Light node running fully on chain on ICP. So just with smart contract calls, it's really easy to go and grab a Bitcoin balance or to grab the UTXOs that an account has. That's really handy. You can also use their threshold signing subnets. So this is a type of MPC or multi-party computation that uses threshold signatures in order to sign transactions across chains. So they have a threshold ECDSA implementation. So that's like Bitcoin, that's Ethereum L2s. All of those are ECDSA. Probably 50% or more of chains support ECDSA signatures. Then there's a threshold EDDSA. That's like Solana or Cosmos. Those both require EDDSA signatures. And then there's also a threshold Schnorr signing subnet. So that means that for anything related to Taproot, meaning like inscribing an ordinal or etching a rune with an ordinal logo or other Taproot related transactions, you can sign those directly using the threshold Schnorr implementation. And as far as I've seen, I think that's pretty much the suite of threshold signing products that gives you the most interoperability across all chains, especially Bitcoin related.
Does it give you interoperability between chains, or specifically interoperability with Bitcoin? Was my understanding. Again, I haven't looked at this tech in like a couple of years.
Yeah, so it's basically any chain.
Oh, okay.
So in your ICP smart contract, you can hold Bitcoin, you can hold Solana, you can hold Ethereum, you can hold, it's basically you can hold tokens from any chain, and you can directly sign transactions on any chain and broadcast those transactions directly to, whatever RPC endpoint you have. So it's a really, really nice interoperability protocol setup.
Yeah, I was going to say, it kind of sounds like ultimate interoperability vibes, which we're going to get deeper into in a few minutes. It's funny because, so you and I have this history in common. Most folks don't know this about me, but before ordinals, before I worked with Casey, I was actually working full time at the Internet Computer Protocol, working on what at the time was called their chain key Bitcoin product, which was their ECDSA signing protocol, essentially, for executing Bitcoin transactions with ICP smart contracts, essentially, is like in a nutshell. So the way that I thought about that at the time was you're essentially sharding keys amongst ICP nodes, and based on the execution of smart contracts or the validity of smart contracts, key shards are put back together and Bitcoin transactions can be executed without having, a human federated multisig, right? It was this sort of, at the time, really progressive idea, I think, this sort of amazing bridging technology. You can have blockchain nodes executing Bitcoin transactions natively on Bitcoin. Based on smart contract functionality. I mean, is that accurate so far?
Yeah.
Am I kind of giving the TLDR?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
cool. Yeah, so I mean, really, we didn't call it this at the time. We were not using the term Bitcoin L2 to describe this functionality at the time. Now ICP is using the word L2, and I think in the broader definition of how folks are using that word, that's appropriate right now. Back then, we didn't call it an L2. What's your definition of an L2 and why?
Yeah, I lean fairly heavily on L2 beat. L2 beat is like the de facto standard for Ethereum L2s. They have a really fantastic research team, and they have, L2 beat is absolutely fantastic to dive into the modularity thesis of scaling blockchains, and look at what is currently being done with optimistic rollups and with validity rollups or L2s. And that they define an L2 pretty strictly as, essentially you have to have unilateral exit, meaning that you need to be able to do an L1 transaction to get your funds back from an L2. And then you
permissionlessly.
Yeah.
That's a really key feature of that. I just want to make sure we underscore. You have to be able to get your funds out without having any permissioned anything, right? Yeah. On your own without anyone's help.
Which generally requires that you can verify proofs at the L1 layer directly, which you can do on Ethereum because you have enough programmability and solidity to do that. On Bitcoin, it depends on who you talk to and when you talk to them. It's really hard right now to verify proofs directly on Bitcoin L1, especially in real world context with the real rollup with real data on Bitcoin L1. And there are other problems associated with that we can dive into if you want. But that's my definition of an L2. So I would say that we don't have any L2s on Bitcoin right now. Although I would say Lightning probably counts.
I was going to say Lightning does, you do get permissionless exit from Lightning. You just don't get it through a proof system, which I do think is a little bit of, that's a very Ethereum idea, right? The idea that in order to do this, you need to use this proof system that Ethereum uses. Much like ordinals, Bitcoin is this entirely different system, and Lightning has this completely different way of creating permissionless exit that has nothing to do with ZKPs. Although now we are starting to see ZKPs on Bitcoin as well. So excited to dive into that. Yeah.
The downside of Lightning is you don't get the programmability of like an Ethereum L2 gives you some speed improvements, like throughput improvements, because you're offloading compute outside of the L1. And in addition to that, you also get full programmability. So you can have any kind of execution environment. You can do all kinds of crazy smart contracts. Lightning gives you speed, and it doesn't really give you programmability.
It doesn't really give you programmability. It's a payment. It's payments. It's just for payments.
Yeah.
That's basically it, right? Which the maxis would say that's all you need. We don't need this DeFi stuff. Who cares about trading? It's all shitcoinery. But yeah, I think that, anyone who's really being rational and in their right mind, maxi or not, would have to admit that clearly there is a market for activities outside of just quick payments. And it sounds like this is something that you're pretty interested in seeing develop on Bitcoin.
Yeah, I want speed and I want programmability. And so Lightning is a fantastic step in the right direction. And I think, giving us, this kind of fast payment system is fantastic. But I'm just craving programmability plus some, throughput speed.
Are you a trader, Bob? Are you a degen yourself?
As much as possible, yes. But as a content creator and a degen and a builder, you can really only pick one. And if you pick more than one, then you start dropping the ball. And if you pick all three, then you're just going to fail miserably at all three. So you kind of have to pick and choose.
Okay, so what are your favorite current, well, actually, I'll back up for a second. I was going to ask what your favorite current proposals are for actuating DeFi on Bitcoin, specifically like programmable smart contract style DeFi on Bitcoin. But maybe before we get into that, it would be useful to identify some of the challenges with creating those kinds of protocols and those kinds of solutions on Bitcoin. Like what is it with Bitcoin specifically that makes DeFi difficult?
Yeah, when you think about DeFi, you think about tokens. So you need token standards. You need to be able to issue tokens directly. You need to be able to set up pools to trade tokens, whether that's order book or AMM. You have to have like the infrastructure in order to support all of that. I mean, that's what people think about with DeFi. And Bitcoin is limited mostly because Bitcoin script is limiting in terms of programmability. You don't have public, globally available smart contracts like you do on Ethereum. And so it makes DeFi very challenging. We have, I don't know, probably hundreds of token standard proposals at this point across all meta protocols on Bitcoin. First BRC20, which still has some traction, and then Runes has taken off recently, especially with some nice market cap dominance as the kind of people are saying now the de facto token standard on Bitcoin.
I think the Runes BRC20 flippening was like a few weeks ago, right? It was a few weeks ago. You had Dog, the greatest market cap rune, flip the market cap of Ordi, which was kind of a big deal for Runes, honestly. Good for Runes. You did it.
Yeah, and Runes is a fantastic fungible token standard from a technical perspective. It is very Bitcoin friendly. Which what more do you expect from Casey? It's a byte efficient, minimalistic, elegant fungible token protocol. Like it's exactly what we need on Bitcoin. And so I think it's easier to use for people directly, and is simple. And I think it's fantastic. It doesn't have all the features in the world. I know a lot of people have taken Runes and have forked it to try to create programmable Runes, or Runes but add some DeFi stuff, or Runes but add some other needed functionality. And I think this is one way people are trying to bring DeFi to Bitcoin, is by new meta protocols that augment the Rune standard. The downside of doing that,
Runes would be one of them. Proto Runes is probably the most well-known, and it's still pretty small of an idea, right? I mean, most people haven't heard of Proto Runes, but in our universe, that's probably the one that people are most familiar with.
Rune State Machine is another one, RSM.
Okay.
That's like
I'm not super familiar with, but that's also sort of a programmable meta protocol standard, right? We should. I'd be curious to get your take on that. But yeah, so there's a bunch. It seems like this is one way. Oh, and Glitter, Nick Calabro's. Yeah. So there's a handful of these popping up.
And let's see, the one that tapped it, Pipe. Pipe was their Runes. Right. Yeah.
That's
Rune standard. So yeah, there are a lot of these. The downside is they're a separate meta protocol, meaning separate standard, meaning yet another standard, which is challenging because a lot of builders and infrastructure has been developed for Rune, specifically the base Rune standard. And if we're going to start getting new meta protocols, like how do you bootstrap that? Like how do you get traction? How do you get liquidity? How do you like merge the two? Like it's a challenge. It's a big challenge.
It's very, very hard. I mean, I've personally been approached about doing like comms and marketing for some of these meta protocols, and it's like completely intimidating thinking about, launching a meta protocol to like go up against Runes or BRC20. But if you just create a meta protocol without the aim of taking, kind of winning, right? Of like, all meta protocols maybe eventually accrue to one, then you just have fragmentation, which is what we're seeing right now, even with BRC20 and Runes, which sort of brings us to this bigger challenge, I think, that you've become very, that you said is near and dear to your heart, which is, interoperability. How do you make these meta protocols interoperable? Because they currently aren't.
Yeah. Yep. Big problem.
Big problem. Big problem. So yeah, do you imagine a world where all of these new Bitcoin meta protocols become interoperable, or it's like a fight to the death and one eventually wins, and all of the infra is built around that one, and we try to, create DeFi and create, scalability solutions, et cetera, around that one winner?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting question, not just for meta protocols, but for Bitcoin sidechains and Bitcoin L2s. I mean, we could ask the exact same question. Currently, we have, I don't know, dozens and dozens of meta protocols. Like I have a list. It's like 24 under active development. These are all meta protocols. We could make the same kind of list on the sidechain side. We could make the same kind of list on the L2 side. And how do you, how do you predict the future here for all of these? We almost have, it's almost like because there's been so much funding that has gone into all of these projects, you almost have fragmentation because of the capital forces coming into the ecosystem. It's almost like a land grab where you're incentivized to create your own new thing and try to, claim some space in the ecosystem, because over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of value accrue directly to the chain. And so from like a Bitcoin L2, I mean, I think this was why we had, this 100 or 80 plus Bitcoin L2s pop up, because we've seen a lot of value accrual directly to the chain, rather than necessarily apps on the chain. I mean, this might change moving into the future. And so it was really easy for VCs to think, oh, Bitcoin is going to be massive. L2s on Bitcoin are going to be massive. We have a Bitcoin thesis. We love Bitcoin. Value is likely going to accrue to these L2s, and so let's invest there. But now we have money that's essentially driving. It's like pushing fragmentation into the market, where now we have dozens of meta protocols and dozens of sidechains and dozens of L2s, and all they want is users and TVL and developers and good applications. And so now you have like they're all essentially fighting for mindshare and for developers to build good apps to bring users. So this is a big problem that I think we're going to see over the next. I mean, we're already seeing it, but I think it becomes more pronounced over the next year as more and more L2s go to mainnet and as they start to get more traction with applications and developers. I think it's just going to be a bloodbath. Some people will throw money. We've seen Merlin with their staking incentives already. Lots of people went in, staked, got their rewards, and then left. They probably retained some users. So that's a long way of saying of like summarizing. I think the way that I would put a conclusion on this is I think the winners will be the ones that align a specific use case that solves a big problem for users. Think about it like product market fit, essentially. So they built a chain that can uniquely support a particular use case in a really fantastic way. And you just have really, really easy user experience that targets a specific demographic in the Bitcoin community, or maybe it's even broader to normies. But I think if you make the right trade-offs, on the technical side, it's all about trade-offs regarding speed and security and decentralization. And if you can make the right trade-offs for the right use case, for the right users, and make it easy enough to use, then I think, you can probably succeed.
So, I mean, you mentioned that like the incentive structure is a little bit specific, maybe not the best in terms of like what will actually push like the whole space forward. I mean, is the incentive structure is the reason why the value accrues to the chain because of these tokens that people basically are launching as essentially forms of equity in these projects? I mean, is that the reason why you see value accruing to the chain rather than to applications?
Yeah, I mean, apps can launch tokens and chains can launch tokens, and we've seen that in the Ethereum ecosystem, but more value has accrued to the chain than has accrued to any individual application. And I don't know if there's a reason other than people love infrastructure and, it's the picks and shovels idea. I have seen kind of a narrative shift happening over the last couple of months where a lot of people are saying that in the future, it won't be infrastructure related. It will be apps that will win. It will be app tokens where value will accrue not to the ecosystem, because essentially rollups are almost commoditized at this point, where anyone can go and spin up their own chain in a matter of minutes. Like we could go spin up our own Bob and Isabel chain and launch a token, and we could do it all in the next 30 minutes probably. And so if the chain or if the technology becomes commoditized, and we've seen everyone launching their own chain, basically, Uniswap launching their own chain, Pudgy Penguins launching their own chain. I mean, there's a long line of projects that are opting to launch their own chain. If chains become commoditized like that and you can move whenever you want, then value may start to accrue at the application side rather than at the chain level.
I mean, it sounds like this is likely why I think there is a subsection of professionals in the space who are uniquely obsessed with bridging, right? Like, how do you solve the bridging problem is, I think, one of the major ways that people are approaching this industry and sort of approaching what is the Bitcoin Renaissance? What do we need to push the Bitcoin Renaissance forward? We need a functioning bridge. We need a bridge that satisfies perhaps permissionless exit was something that you mentioned. I don't know if there were others that you mentioned on sort of your definition of an L2, but anything, I forget if we mentioned anything other than permissionless exit in your definition.
Yeah, I mean, technically you should use Bitcoin as a full data availability layer so that you're not trusting any external DA. And then you should have the proofs, like post proofs directly to Bitcoin L1, and Bitcoin L1 should verify those proofs directly. So then you're not relying on an external DA layer. You're not relying on anyone else to verify the proofs because Bitcoin can do it directly. And then I think there are a couple other requirements in terms of like programmability on the Bitcoin side, like maintaining your state root and other things like that. But that's generally the way that I think about it.
Okay, so the ability for so basically Bitcoin miners to directly verify the proofs would be one. Is that specifically what you mean, or it doesn't have to be miners?
I just mean in Bitcoin script, you need to be able to verify a validity proof, essentially.
Verification, right? So ability to verify proofs on Bitcoin natively. Data availability on Bitcoin, meaning all of the data of the accounting layer that's off chain, the second layer accounting layer should be available on Bitcoin so people can verify it on Bitcoin directly on chain as well, which is that's one of the biggest challenges, I think. And then permissionless exit, right? The ability to get your Bitcoin off. Let's talk about data availability for a second. I know that this is like one, this might be the biggest challenge with like ZKPs or BitVM style solutions. Would you agree with that? Or would you say there are other kind of challenges with zero knowledge proof BitVM style solutions to the bridging problem?
I would say that data availability will be a problem. It is unsolved. I mean, verifying proofs in like a real world rollup context is also a challenge. I think doing lighter versions of proof verification is possible. But like actually having a rollup that posts all the data in a proof and having that verify, I think is a lot more complicated than anyone has tackled right now in like the BitVM, BitVM2, BitVMX world. And so I think it's partly cheaply verifying proofs, and it's partly DA that is problematic.
Would you say it's fair to say that you are cautiously optimistic about BitVM ZK style solutions, or are you a little bit more critical and kind of the mind that we may need upgrades to Bitcoin and sort of Bitcoin improvement proposals to get the kinds of solutions that you would want for trustless bridging?
Yeah, I think that OpCat is good for everyone. And that includes people building Lightning and people building BitVM and people building on metaprotocols and people using PSBTs. I think CAT is good for everyone across the board. Anyone involved in the Bitcoin ecosystem, I see CAT as a win-win, win-win. And that might come across as, hyper bullish on CAT, but it's just concatenation on the stack. And fairly simple from a code perspective. The furthest reaches, the implications of it are a little bit unknown, but not that unknown. I mean, we have it on Signet, and we have lots of interesting examples of what people can do. And I still have yet to, really hear a strong critique for why CAT is bad for Bitcoin. There are lots of proposed answers to that question, but you can basically do all of them right now. So there are no, net new attack vectors introduced by CAT. So that's my first, CAT plug.
You love CAT. You love OpCat.
I think it's fantastic. I think it's good for everyone. Going back to BitVM models, I think there are a lot of brilliant engineers working on BitVM, which makes me very excited about the future of BitVM. Most of the BitVM models still have some pretty big limitations in terms of like me as a normal user being able to use the bridges in a cost-efficient way. And so I think we may get a nice BitVM style bridge that works, but it might only work for, whales or for big liquidity providers or for big like partners that are going to come in and bring lots of liquidity. And we can talk deeper about what those limitations are. And then there are some scaling concerns as well. And so it might not be, we might not have $10 billion locked up in a BitVM bridge unless they're essentially liquidity provider partners. And so we might see something like that if there are just big whales willing to come in and bring liquidity. But there are some limitations that make me think that it might not be good enough for all of our bridging needs in the near term. I think large liquidity providers coming in, partnering with these bridges to provide liquidity, I think that's fantastic. To bridge my runes to Solana, I think it's going to be really, really hard to use a BitVM bridge because of runes and the unique implementation and the various token standards or various tokens, and then trying to do that in a way that like works and is cost efficient and is fast enough and isn't just like crazy on the technical side.
So I'm curious if, let's just sort of putting BitVM aside for a second, it sounds like maybe OpCat would solve some of these problems. How does this concatenation opcode solve trustless bridging?
More broadly, the reason why cat is fantastic is if you look at like a Merkle tree. A Merkle tree is basically like you have a whole bunch of leaf nodes down here, and the way that you aggregate them up is you concatenate them and then hash it. And now you have a new hash, and then you go up a layer and you concatenate and hash until you get to the first, the top, which is like the Merkle root. And the beauty of something like that with cat is you can mimic this Merkle tree leveraging Bitcoin script, because you can concatenate now with cat and you can hash. And so now you can do all kinds of interesting introspection in a Bitcoin transaction. Introspection meaning if this transaction was sent from an address or is being sent to an address or has a specific amount. This introspection idea is what gives you all of the interesting programmability, like covenant type functionality. And so that's why cat is powerful. Not just uniquely for like trustless bridging, but like broadly, why I think it's beneficial for everyone building on Bitcoin is you now have this unique ability for transaction introspection, and that gives you superpowers. So I think cat is more than just bridging. It's just providing additional programmability for Bitcoin. And one of the benefits is, and you can do better bridging with cat as well.
Well, so it's not just the bridge. I was under the impression that OpCat enabled this trustless bridge situation, which then opened up, now we have trustless bridging, so we can open up into any execution environment that we want with any kind of programmability features that we want. But you're saying that it's actually deeper than that. You can actually create programmability on native Bitcoin without a layer 2. How does that work with OpCat? How does OpCat enable that?
Have you played around on Fractal at all?
I feel like I should have, but like barely.
Okay, so Fractal is a fork of Bitcoin. They went and made a bunch of changes to Bitcoin. One of the changes was they added OpCat. And so because of this, they created a token standard called CAT20, which is essentially like runes or BRC20, but it's a fungible token standard that is covenant based. And so, when you are like minting out a token with like a free and fair launch on BRC20 or runes, and you don't make it in time, your transactions still go through. And your transactions still go through because Bitcoin doesn't know anything about the meta protocol. The meta protocol layer is completely outside of the consensus layer. You're just putting data in there. And if you put those transactions through after the cutoff, meaning all of the tokens have already been claimed, then you're just like wasting your Bitcoin. In the CAT20 case, that doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen because you've built into the script itself this token limit. So when you mint, your transaction will actually fail if all of the tokens have already been claimed. So this is one like really specific example of why CAT can create a better fungible token standard on Bitcoin that doesn't suffer from some of the problems of BRC20 and runes being completely outside of the consensus layer on Bitcoin.
I think this is potentially another kind of broader new meta, which is like you solve some of the problems associated with bridging to an L2 if you effectively bridge into a Bitcoin native meta protocol, right? Like that sort of kind of sounds like what you're describing is like you have a meta protocol that now has governance features. So you can do everything native to Bitcoin. You don't even need to have any kind of, trustless wrapped Bitcoin outside of native Bitcoin. I mean, am I kind of getting that right?
Yeah, you can do a lot with covenants directly on the base layer, including bridging, but not exclusive to bridging. And you can do all kinds of other interesting things just by having covenants, this introspection of Bitcoin transactions.
Would you need new meta protocols to be developed though, like this Cat 20 or whatever? Would you need like completely new token standards to be developed around this? You couldn't apply this to
Likely,
existing runes, right?
likely yes. Although there might be a way to take an existing meta protocol and just commit your UTXO directly to one of these scripts, essentially opting in to to the uh, to the token standard, and you might be able to get that working. It's a little tricky because Runes lives fully off chain, and so you would need some kind of like Oracle type feature that can actually like go and grab it and like say yes, this is valid. And I don't know how you do that. So there might be a way. It's not coming to me right now. So challenges with bringing like runes into something like this, but net new, yes, you could do net new.
Okay, so let's back up for a second. Let's say that we are living in the land where the ideal situation, the best option that we have for creating real programmability is to have some sort of external environment, some sort of external L2 that we magically figure out how to create trustless bridging with. Maybe it's Opcat that gives us that trustless bridge from Bitcoin into some other non-Bitcoin native execution environment. Does that in and of itself, like if we just solved trustless bridging, would that solve the programmability problem in your mind? Like, is that the answer? If we can get full trustless bridging to an external execution environment, would that be enough for you?
So that is a great question. You could argue that we still don't have true L2s on Ethereum, even with the programmability required, even with verifying these proofs on chain, even with having really upgraded and fantastic data availability infrastructure, it's still really hard to build a true L2. What I mean by that is most of these L2s, by most I mean all, they still have admin upgrade keys where the team can go in and fix bugs if they happen. And so you don't have a trustless setup where you can actually go and interact on this other layer that inherits all of the security and decentralization of Bitcoin or Ethereum without adding any new additional trust assumptions. There's still points of centralization, whether it's a centralized sequencer or whether it's admin keys allowing some group of individuals to upgrade the protocol, or there are a few other things as well. And so even in the case that we get CAT, and even in the case that we get a really fantastic L2 built on it, it's still not the holy grail. It's not the silver bullet that solves all of our problems. It's a fantastic step in the right direction, and I think it's a really, really it's a worthwhile endeavor. Yes, we should do it. Yes, we should work towards this future, but it's still not Bitcoin. It's not the full decentralization and security of Bitcoin and programmability. It's making a set of trade-offs to give us speed and programmability on top of Bitcoin. So it's like Bitcoin as like the core, like we'll put it as like the number one most decentralized blockchain in the world, and a Bitcoin L2 is going to be a step down from Bitcoin because you can't yet really get all the way there. So I just put that caveat because I think it will be fantastic, and yes, we should do it, and I think we need it, but it's not like the holy grail.
All right, so these are kind of like the key trust assumption problems that we've sort of identified with the execution environment L2 solution to programmability, right? So in my mind, I'm sort of thinking that we've covered today. There's two ways that we could create programmability for Bitcoin. The theoretical perfect bridge to some external execution environment. We kind of just covered some of the challenges there. The other option is making Bitcoin native metaprotocols programmable and just sort of moving into that universe directly. Challenges there. I mean, we sort of covered interoperability sort of being probably the main one. It sounds like, especially in a post-OpCat universe, maybe there is sort of a either interoperable way that we could get at least some of these new meta protocols working with each other, or maybe it's a fight to the death and one wins and that's that. Final thoughts on this, and then we're going to have to do a part 2, Bob, where we talk about all of the DeFi use cases. But yeah, I think we covered a lot today to start. So thoughts?
Yeah, I think in the broader crypto ecosystem, there is the modularity thesis versus the integrated thesis. The modularity thesis is essentially like L2s. We want to have proving, we want to have a DA layer, we want to split things up into layers and make it all composable. And then on the flip side, it's, well, let's just upgrade the base layer directly. We can add opcat as a start. I mean, there's the great script restoration. There's other opcodes that could make Bitcoin better.
Is opcat your favorite, or do you have like other opcodes that you would prefer?
I think cat is the most beneficial. And I think it's because it doesn't just target covenants. Like I said before, it enables concatenation on the stack, which is a kind of a low-level primitive that then enables better bridging, yes, but also makes Lightning better. And it also gives us transaction introspection. And because it makes Bitcoin better for everyone, I like it as an opcode more than just like, CTV, for example, as like a strict covenants implementation, because CTV gives us covenants, but it doesn't give us the full breadth of awesomeness that a lower level simple concatenation opcode would. So I like cat better.
I have to ask, because you so rarely hear the words opcat and Lightning even in the same sentence these days. I feel like it's like Team Lightning and then like Team Bitcoin Season 2 /opcat/UDI. How does opcat theoretically improve Lightning?
One of the challenges with Lightning is you have to create a channel. And creating a channel requires a Bitcoin L1 transaction, and that is only possible for a certain number of humans on Earth until you run out of space. And so there's an idea with like shared UTXOs where multiple people could commit in a single transaction. And so instead of one person, what if you could do 100 people? Or what if you could do 1,000 people or 10,000 people? And I think there is a way with covenants to do this kind of like shared UTXO example where you could then better scale Lightning leveraging CAP and covenants.
Well, it's kind of like creating improved internal bridging, right? Like if you think of like the way Lightning is set up right now with this 2 of 2 multi-sig, I mean, you kind of are in a way having this like bridge transaction in and out of Lightning when you're opening and closing channels. This is like a way not just to improve, or opcat potentially improves not just bridging externally, but also theoretically internally to like Lightning.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Word. Okay, cool. Oh my gosh, so much going on in this conversation. We need to do a separate episode about DeFi because as a recovering Bitcoin maximalist / like still pretty maxi-ish myself, I don't know very much about DeFi at all, as we've talked about. And so much of this, it's like, I feel like I'm learning about DeFi the way that the DeFi folks are maybe learning about Bitcoin. So I would love to do that brainstorm with you when you're up for it next. I'll give you a little break and then I'll have you back.
That sounds great. There's a lot of interesting models happening right now on the Bitcoin DeFi side as people start to think about runes AMMs and bridging runes to Solana and other things like that. So yeah, very, very interesting conversation.
Anything that the maxi devs who may be watching this should watch or look at or take a peek at if they're interested in kind of learning about all of the tech that's happening on the Bitcoin DeFi side?
They might hate DeFi in principle.
They might hate DeFi. That's a problem.
I would say check out tools like LumenX, like go and etch a rune and look at the UTXO and look at what it looks like and understand why, that's a runes etching. And then I would try to mint some runes, take $10 of your Bitcoin and go mint some runes, follow them through the mempool, look at the Bitcoin transactions, look at, go check out some of the runes indexer code, maybe even deploy ORD yourself, go run your own indexer and check out your own balances. And then, package those up in UTXOs and get them on Magic Eden, and then, buy and sell, like just for the experience of how the runes meta protocol is facilitating interesting things on Bitcoin.
One of my hot takes about this space is, when ordinals first came out, I mean, I remember advising and talking to investors and kind of chatting about like the biggest challenges in the space. I feel like when ordinals first happened, the biggest challenge was that you had all of these developers coming from mostly like EVM, SVM style ecosystems, and they had never worked with a UTXO set, and they had no idea how Bitcoin works, and they were like really struggling. That's what I was seeing, was a lot of like technical struggles to like trying to adapt to development on Bitcoin. And I think now what you're starting to see is like a flippening, where actually it's the developers who are coming from other ecosystems who have spent the past 2 years learning about Bitcoin, who are kind of getting ahead of the curve, because they're actually paying attention to all of this new innovation and all of this new development happening. And the maxi devs aren't really paying attention to that. Just final thoughts on sort of the cultural side. Are you seeing something like that kind of happening right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we had, people are calling this Bitcoin season 2, season 1 and season 2, which is an interesting way to talk about it. And you have a lot of history and culture in season 1, and you have a lot of interesting new innovation in season 2. And I think the content creators and the degens and the builders that are going to be most successful are the ones that can leverage the culture and the authenticity and the cypherpunkness of season 1 in the context of the new innovation happening in season 2.
That's a perfect place to wrap up. Wow, very well said, Bob. Thank you so much. Thank you. It is always such a pleasure to talk to you, and excited to have you back soon.
Yeah, thanks so much.